I'm Bobby Chappell. As Kate said, I am in Greenville, South Carolina, and I feel like, like this concept of destination stewardship is something that I have been working on my whole life. There we go. And I'm excited to share some of these ideas with the group. It was started when I was a kid, doing camping trips, in North Georgia and Western North Carolina, exploring the national parks and the gateway communities of the American West. And then just really kind of having that turn into this passion of exploration and conservation, and shaping that passion into a career. Also, Asheville holds a special place for me in my heart. I'm born and raised in Georgia and live in, upstate South Carolina now, but, in my college years and for many years thereafter, Asheville was always a great stopover spot before and after backpacking trips. I've lived around the world and around the country, and kind of every time I've ever left, I've always tried to make a move to Asheville, and we've come really close. We're in Greenville. We got, almost that close. And I've watched the destination really just kind of grow and mature through the years, have watched the popularity explode, have watched some of the challenges that you're facing with that increased visitation, and now excited to see the work that you're going to produce to create a more sustainable tourism destination. So, Asheville is certainly struggling with popularity, and this is something that's common in communities and destinations around the country, around the world. A lot of times that starts with the downtown revitalization, and I think is what's interesting is, these types of revitalizations are usually done for the benefit of the local residents. They're done for local businesses. It's an economic development opportunity. And for Asheville, that's exactly what happened in the 80s and 90s. And for years, it was a haven for artists, entrepreneurs, outdoor enthusiasts. And then the word got out. The word got out to developers who wanted to really get involved with this tourism boom and this massive economic development opportunity. Also got out to visitors that were searching out, that Asheville vibe. Seems like things we're hitting a flashpoint in 2019 with a lot of calls on how, these tourism revenues were being spent, led to a moratorium on new hotel development. The pandemic certainly changed everything for everybody in the travel and tourism industry. But now here we are in 2022 with an opportunity to really focus on a more regenerative visitor economy. And that's something that is really important, because you want to make sure you're avoiding these impacts around over tourism. We've watched this happen globally, worldwide for 10 years, and have still, in some respects, failed to come up with really good solutions. But there are a number of lessons learned that we can start to apply here as well. Certainly here locally, and throughout the U.S., and was really exaggerated through the pandemic. Public lands being loved to death, overflowing parking lots and damage to trails and campsites, litter, destruction of property. Also, even more so, unchecked social impacts, certainly around this phenomenon of short-term rentals driving out long-term residents and creating these massive shifts in affordable housing, traffic, workforce retainment, equitable representation, lack of, just elevating inequalities. And then also not being able to see the forest through the trees. I know Megan Epler-Wood spoke to this group a couple of months ago about the invisible burden of tourism, or this idea that as increasing visitation happens, the impacts, these broad ripple effect impacts are not being measured appropriately. And then, certainly this growing anti-tourism sentiment amongst community leaders and members. And so this is leading to an important question, which is, does this place exist just to serve tourism, or does tourism actually work to serve this place? And that's the whole idea of kind of reframing the purpose of tourism, and in many cases, tourism can make an easy scapegoat, but it's not usually solely the main reason why some of these issues are happening. In many cases, these are symptoms that are rising to the surface from much broader systemic issues, and commend what this group is doing to really try to hone in on what those real issues are, and tackle them with specific actions. But it is true, tourism has a significant influence within communities, and that makes it a valuable ally in many places, where it can play a pretty significant role in working to reframe tourism and moving it from just being an economic goal to a tool that really works to enhance what the community loves about its place. And we do have tools and management approaches that help with this. So what is sustainable tourism? I'm sure this is a word that you've talked about and kicked around and learned a great deal about. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, but I will generalize it so you understand kind of where my head is when I talk about sustainable tourism, after 12 years of like working at organizations that are at the forefront of sustainable tourism development. And for me, when I think about sustainable tourism, I'm thinking about businesses, and I'm thinking about business operations. And the reason why, I'm thinking about the industry when I think about sustainable tourism. And the reason why is because it's these businesses, they're usually responsible for implementing a large number of sustainability best practices. It's a business that can draft and implement a DEI policy, that has a energy conservation procedures manual in place for its business, that provides access to professional development for its workforce. These are all best practices that businesses are putting into place. In terms of responsible travel, here I'm thinking about behaviors, and I'm thinking about visitor behavior specifically. And primarily because there are visitors out there that are going to specific destinations, or they're searching out specific suppliers because of the choices that they're making around sustainability. They want to adopt responsible behaviors, or there's an opportunity to, educate them about responsible behaviors. And so those are kind of the ways that I see those two, general terms in my mind when I'm thinking about destination stewardship. And so what is a sustainable destination? Well, to me, it's really hard to think about a sustainable destination. It's more about what a destination is doing to perform more sustainably, because it's always the journey, it's never the destination. And is what is happening in these types of communities where they're putting sustainability in the forefront, is they're creating an enabling environment. And is what they're doing is they're looking at the regulatory framework, they're looking at policies, they're looking at programs, they're looking at community services that can allow for better sustainable outcomes. They're also looking at sustainable design, infrastructure, waste and recycling facility, access to renewable energy. So looking at these components really holistically to create that enabling environment that can help a business be more sustainable, and can also help travelers act more responsibly while they're in the destination. And this certainly doesn't happen in a vacuum or in a silo. It really requires collaboration amongst all of the different stakeholder groups, so the DMO, the Destination Marketing Organization, the TDA, municipality managers, land managers, civic sector, and the private sector. And when this all comes together, it's the concept of destination stewardship, or the big picture, community-centric approach to the careful and responsible management of common pool resources. And so common pool resources are things like climate, water, your workforce, economic development, your lands. These are common pool resources. It's the resources that if they're negatively impacted, it will have a negative effect on the entire community. Similarly, if they're positively impacted, they can have a positive impact on the entire community. And so what are we collectively working towards with destination stewardship? Well, it's really about vibrant cultures. It's not specifically about a booming tourism industry. It's more about creating thriving cultures. It's about having a vibrant or thriving communities with a vibrant culture and healthy environments and ecosystems, a strong economy, really thinking about the community value. What is tourism doing for the community? And so ultimately, destination stewardship is working towards, improving quality of life, safeguarding sense of place, and enhancing visitor experience. And so the Mountain Ideal program, which I represent, is a destination stewardship toolkit. And it was specifically designed for resort, rural recreation, and gateway communities. The program is built upon a sustainable destination management standard, and using that standard, it is creates a toolkit for action, and it is also a recognition program that communities can use to become third-party certified. And we've done that with 2 destinations, Vail, Colorado, and Breckenridge, Colorado, which are 2 of the only 3 certified destinations in the US. And so I want to take a minute to talk about why, this entire program is built upon a standard. I'm sure you've looked at the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, which is our de facto organization for sustainable tourism standards and certification. And the standards that they have created have been developed with input from hundreds of experts, hundreds of destination managers, thousands of stakeholders, really working together to create what would be universally known as kind of the universal definition for sustainable destination management. And Mountain Ideal has gone through a rigorous process to show that we are fully aligned with those best practices. And having done that, we have an internationally recognized standard. And this is important because we want to make sure that we're working using kind of expertise of people around the world on what that looks like. We've also invested a lot of time in our standard to make it a validated framework for action. So it's not just words on paper. It's something that you can utilize as a toolkit. We've got 52 best practices, and within each of those best practices, there are indicators that would describe to you how you would implement those best practices. So you can use it as a destination planning and management tool. The standard also has multiple sections and themes, and is what we've tried to do is recognize the idea that sustainability can be somewhat challenging for many destinations because it does require some sophisticated systems to be in place. But stewardship really starts with collaboration and finding common goals. There's a big component around communications, and this is really a lot to do with the true tourism side of it, where sustainability starts looking more into municipality operations and utilities and things like that. So starting where it's most approachable with stewardship. And within the standard, we've identified our top 5 best practices. And the reason why we identified these as the top 5 is because they are so interconnected to other best practices within the standard. We really encourage destinations, if they're not doing anything, to start with these 5, because you actually end up doing a lot more than you realize by doing that. So these are a destination stewardship council, a destination management plan, asset inventory, stewardship fund, and sustainable businesses. And I'm going to talk about the first 4 now. So a destination stewardship council is very similar to what Thrive Asheville is working on with this cohort. It's convening a diverse coalition of stakeholders to collaboratively act upon community issues related to sustainability, quality of life, visitor experience, and sense of place. And the rationale for this is that you're trying to, to work on a problem or an opportunity that maybe feels too big to work on individually. You're also potentially looking for new ideas, or the solution that you're trying to find isn't really clear. So you want input from others. You want to rebuild, you want to build a new system. You want to reset the tourism industry. You want to, reframe the purpose of tourism. You also want to engage with people from different backgrounds to get their inputs, to make sure that, voices around the community are being heard. And in an example, what I've started doing recently with my work, especially here regionally, identifying intersections. And one of the most immediate ones that I started focusing on was the outdoor recreation industry and the outdoor economy. A lot of work that's happening in Western North Carolina. And that's because I see such overlap between sustainable tourism and outdoor recreation. We share similar interest, visitors, public lands, different recreational activities. Those are all, pretty significant overlaps between tourism and recreation. And we also share the same goals that we're working towards. So we have common goals: quality of life, economic development, visitor experience. These are all things that we're working on, independently, so we can hopefully have more success if we're working on those together. And so what does it look like when you start thinking about pulling together that Destination Stewardship Council? Well, it's really about connecting the dots of the community ecosystem, looking at these major stakeholder groups: the DMO, the private sector, land managers, the public sector, civic sector, and starting to just identify, who the key stakeholders are. Also important to recognize that each one of these stakeholder groups certainly has their own priorities. They have their own programs that they're responsible for, their own stakeholders that they're responsible for. So we're not trying to duplicate work. We're trying to just bring these stakeholders together to have a conversation about where there's overlap, where there's intersections, and where there's common ground. And so when we're trying to do that, once you connect those dots, it's really time to mobilize for action. And so destination stewardship really is about collaborating to identify and work towards common goals. Thinking about all of these different stakeholder groups and trying to identify who can lead, who can support, and who can advocate on different aspects of these goals. Is it policy reform? Is it program development, funding, research, advocacy, communications? Trying to find where everybody fits in. And then you're working collaboratively to come up with that community vision. And it doesn't have to be a vision for everything. It's just a vision for these areas of commonalities that have been identified. Then once you kind of come up with those common goals, you want to identify what your priorities are, and then set up an action agenda, and really start working towards those goals in a very kind of manageable process. Some other good practice is utilizing sustainable destination standards for guidance. There's good information out there available in these standards. It's exactly why they are designed and published. I think it's really important to come up with a formal governance model, but you don't want to stumble on that early on. But it's important to start thinking about what that model might look like, and then also coming up with the sustainable funding mechanisms. Many times these are volunteer-run organizations, which can work, but they tend to be more successful if there is some kind of sustainable funding mechanism that's in place. You want to adopt your mission, your goals. You're looking to balance sustainability, authenticity, economic development, conservation, responsible communications. And you're looking to conduct activities that champion the value of tourism and really make sure that communities are working collectively to decide on how tourism is planned, developed, and managed. And so here's a few good examples I would certainly encourage the group to look at. The Crown of the Continent Geotourism Council. It's in Alberta, British Columbia, and Montana. It's kind of the Glacier National Park area. Also, the Columbia River Gorge Tourism Alliance is both in Washington State and Oregon, and it's across a 40-mile region. So it's a really good example of a large regional initiative. Kind of a community-oriented Sedona is doing great work with their sustainable tour with the Destination Stewardship Council, as is the island of St. Kitts. So now I'm going to talk about destination management plans. This is the strategic planning process to create really a plan, an actionable plan that addresses the wide variety of issues within the destination where tourism is creating direct impacts, and those issues where indirect impact, where issues that are having an indirect impact on the tourism industry as well. So tourism strategic planning, there's nothing new about that. It's been around for a long time, but historically it's really kind of focused on two main areas, that being economic development, the whole idea, and branding and marketing, looking to attract visitors for overnight stays, and is focused on product development and destination development type issues. What makes a destination management plan different is it is establishing the community and the place as central stakeholders in that planning process. So not just only being involved in the planning, but also the goals and objectives and actions working for the benefit of the community and the place. And another thing that sets a destination management plan, I think, from other strategic planning processes, is that a DMP has a very significant stakeholder engagement component to it. And this presents an opportunity for your DMO, your destination marketing organization, your TVA, or the municipality to engage with stakeholders to begin that conversation around repositioning the purpose of tourism. So it's almost like going with hat in hand and saying, listen, we know there's been some conflicts. We know there are concerns. We want to listen to you. And it's not just lip service. We want to listen to you, and we want to take your voice and put it into this plan on what tourism is going to look like in the future. And also using that as an opportunity to rebuild confidence in the value of tourism, to really highlight what the benefits are beyond just, oh, well, we had this many visitors, they spent this much money, and so that reduces $200 a year off your property tax. That's not enough. It needs to be really digging deep to understand why tourism is valuable for your community, and it's usually a very unique reason, and then using that as a communication platform to have very open conversations with the community to think about where you want to go in the future. And so the plan itself is looking into the future. About a 5 to 10 year plan is usually what DMPs are focused on. And they are looking at about 4 main areas within that plan. As I mentioned, historically, economic development, visitor experience. Those were the 2 big buckets that tourism strategic plans focused on. Now with the DMP, a destination management plan, we're adding the elements of sustainability management. So what can the private sector do? What can the public sector do to improve sustainability within the community? What can visitors do to improve sustainability within the community? And then also quality of life. What are those attributes that tourism needs to play a better role in? Community engagement, infrastructure, workforce development, housing. These are all quality of life issues which can be embedded in a destination management plan. They should also work to build upon existing plans and efforts like a comprehensive plan, but is what it's trying to do is go further in recognizing tourism's ability to lead, support, and advocate for these actions that are controlled by other entities like a municipality, or a utility authority or something like that. How can tourism get more involved in moving all of that forward as well? And so a few examples of destination management plans, which I think are good to look at here because there is some similarities between them, but then they are also very different. So if this is an action that the group is thinking about, it's good to look at what others are doing and really understand what you can do with the plan and how powerful it can be. So in Breckenridge, Colorado, their destination management plan was led by the DMO, the Destination Marketing Organization. So it does tend to focus a bit more on tourism development and management, which does make sense. But the plan also works as a communication tool to communicate the sustainable BREC activities. And this is the comprehensive sustainability programming that's happening at the town level. So even though the DMP was led by the Destination Marketing Organization, and it tends to focus on tourism, it is really connecting tourism to town initiatives. So much so that this plan was adopted by the town council. And I know it's difficult to see these here. So their goals that they set were to deliver a balanced year-round economy, to fiercely protect Breckenridge's authentic character, more boots and bikes, less cars. So really trying to get people out of cars and moving around through public transportation and biking, and establishing Breckenridge as a leader in mountain environmental sustainability. Then Durango, similarly, this was done by their destination marketing organization, but is what they've done over the last couple of years is make an intentional shift from just being a destination marketing organization to becoming a destination marketing and management organization. And even though they did that, the plan itself is still pretty heavily focused on brand and on marketing, which makes sense, but they definitely integrate sustainability management heavily into the plan, and their goals support the tourism industry and economy and economic recovery during COVID, to support a year-round economy by dispersing visitors seasonally and geographically, to increase the positive visitor experiences, to attract a high-value, responsible traveler, and to increase the quality of life and educate residents on the value of tourism, and to advocate on behalf of their tourism stakeholders. Then finally, Whitefish, Montana. I think this is the best example of a full community picture, where what they did was they identified 5 main focus areas, and within each one of those focus areas, the strategies dove into 3 key pillars. And those 3 pillars are community engagement, community character, and livability. And what I think is really cool about this plan is that across the 5 focus areas, it's not how does tourism impact these 5 focus areas, or how do these 5 focus areas impact tourism. Tourism is just one of the focus areas, along with housing and development, right alongside the environment, included in economic, right beside economic development and transportation. It is seen on par with these other critical community focus areas. So now visitor engagement, this is a big bucket of best practices, and this is a big component of what the Mountain Ideal program focuses on, primarily because of the communities that we tend to work with, those resort, rural, recreation, and gateway communities. And so for visitor engagement, we're looking at strategies and actions that address visitor management and communicate the value of tourism. So one of the individual practices within our standard is a visitor management system. And is what a visitor management system actually is the collection of 5 or 6 different individual best practices, and then working to take those practices and to really craft them into a functional system, like a quality management system, where you're assigning roles and responsibility, you are tracking progress over time, and you are focused on continuous improvement, really looking at this holistically as a management system. Some of the best practices within our visitor management system is an asset inventory. This is kind of the jumping off point. Like I said, it's one of the top 5 best practices. An asset inventory, by assets, we're talking about natural assets, state parks, national forest, specific natural attractions. I'm thinking of like sliding rock, looking glass, like those types of assets, as well as local museums, cultural events, just a whole variety of different assets within your destination that really illustrate the character of your destination. And doing the inventory, you're looking to identify, classify, and evaluate these key visitor and community assets. And what I mean by that is you just think of it as a massive spreadsheet where first you come up with the list of all of your different inventory, or, you come up with your inventory, the long list of different assets, and then start to identify and classify them. Is it a natural asset? Is it a cultural asset? Who's responsible for it? Is it managed by the U.S. Forest Service? Is it managed by a local civic group? Then beginning to evaluate these different assets. Is this, at a particular trailhead or a very popular trail, are there, sensitive, threatened, or endangered species that are there that need extra, management oversight to make sure that trails aren't deviated off of current paths? Is it some sort of migration route that, so the area needs to be closed at certain times of year? Taking all of those considerations and putting them on paper across a large spreadsheet to where you can start to see all of this, in real time in one place. Part of the process of doing that certainly requires land manager engagement. And the reason why is because in so many cases, we're not seeing conversations between DMOs and land managers, and it's a missed opportunity, because as you start to see some of these issues rising to the top, like that a certain trailhead needs to be closed at certain times of year because of a migration route, that should be something that is made publicly available to visitors, so they don't go there, a trail's closed, and they have a negative experience. So is what you're trying to do is just, identify the solutions around common goals. Another big one is encouraging responsible visitation. So leave no trace, the leave no trace principles, right? That's sharing that message out to visitors, is really trying to encourage responsible visitation. And this is happening at the state level in North Carolina from Visit NC and the Office of Outdoor Recreation. And they're working with Leave No Trace to develop Outdoor NC, where they're taking the Leave No Trace principles and they're making them North Carolina specific, and then beginning to share that out with visitors so that they're aware of these efforts that are happening throughout the state. Locally, in Transylvania County, they have something similar, which is their Leave It Better campaign and their waterfall safety campaign, just really trying to find ways to get information in the hands of visitors about being responsible. And then finally, visitor impact monitoring. So this is that idea of going beyond volume and value, or the heads and beds indicators, and thinking more about the invisible burden indicators. Next up, community and conservation communications. And so this is an opportunity where the DMOs can and should take a leadership role in reframing the purpose of tourism and communicating the value of tourism. And the reason why is because DMOs, destination marketing organizations, they're communicators. That's what they do. That's where occupancy tax goes to DMOs to communicate, what's great about their community. So it's really just about repositioning some of those communications. And the reason why I think DMOs are just perfectly suited for this is they create creative marketing campaigns. And so really empowering them to do that, to utilize their strength to share messages, not just with visitors though, but also with residents. And as I mentioned, the Leave It Better campaign in Transylvania County, I just, some of the pictures here, you can see, I mean, they're creatives. That's what they do. And so it's a powerful tool. And I would certainly encourage, that be an easy win for the reframing of tourism. There's also opportunities for creating sustainable tourism websites, which either live within a DMO website or it's kind of external of. And there's a lot of these kind of popping up in different destinations that are, kind of managed and hosted by the DMO, which is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, where, maybe a really passionate group put something together. This is, finally having the DMO commit to doing some of this work. Things that might have a green business trail, might have a listing of trails that are accessible, that have interpretation, locally owned businesses, or where you can access low impact transportation, some cool itineraries that you might be able to do on a 2-day, 3-day trip to the destination. And I would say a couple of examples to look at: Sustainable Breck and Be Like Breckenridge. And I mentioned both of those earlier. They're just doing great work there. Sustainable Breck is what's happening in town, like the municipality programs, and Be Like Breckenridge is what the DMO was putting out there. And they are working in unison pretty well. So a really good example. Another example, Love Vail in Vail, Colorado. It's kind of their sustainability hub for the town and other initiatives around the valley. And Responsibly Wild in Jackson, Wyoming. And then finally, Stewardship and Conservation Funds. And this is something that, I've been working in pulling these things together for a long time. And I just love them because they're a visitor engagement tool. So a way to communicate some of these important issues to your visitors. And it's also a stewardship tool, and is what they tend to be is some sort of platform where you can collect donations and distribute funds to applicable projects. And one of the things I really want to mention here too is Pledge to the Wild, which is a collection of about 15 or 16 different communities around the country, where anyone can go to their website, can read about their different community assets and donate directly to a particular project. And Asheville is a member, and the direct donations from Pledge to the Wild go to the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation, which is fantastic. So Asheville is already a member of this, but I would certainly encourage, something for this group to think about is creating, a more localized fund where you can have a bit more control over where those resources go. So instead of everything going to one particular place, you can think about, how you could separate those donations up to more viable projects. And again, in Transylvania County, they're doing some really amazing work there. And it all started with their Transylvania Always work that they have been doing for 5 or 6, 7 years or something like that. And they don't have a direct donation portal. Is what they're actually doing is diverting revenues from their occupancy tax to fund local conservation projects. So we know that 66 to 75% of all occupancy tax have to be used for promoting overnight stays within the community. But there's still 33 to 25% of those revenues that are left over. is what Transylvania County is doing, is they are taking those funds and they are identifying specific projects which have the most kind of, value, where that fund can have the most valuable impact, and they're directly donating to help land managers with these projects. And the reason why is because they know that their public lands is their primary tourism asset. And if that asset is diminished, so is their tourism industry. So it behooves them to make sure that they are taking care of their primary asset. All right. And so now, just to wrap things up with a quick final closure on Mountain Ideal. And the reason why I mention it is just to quickly talk about the toolkit. We got 3 big buckets in the toolkit. We have an assessment tool, 2 different ones. The first one is just a set of core best practices, 18 best practices that most destinations should be able to have in place, and many of the practices probably already are in place. And if you need to add to them or kind of complete them, it's about a 6-month process. And then the full standard, the whole standard, 52 best practices, over 100 indicators. This is a comprehensive assessment where you can go through, identify where you're performing well, where there's gaps, start to think about what your priorities are, and build out an action agenda. We also offer planning services, so our advisory services to help develop a roadmap, go through a visioning process, identify priorities, as well as doing some of those implementation projects like a destination stewardship plan, visitor management systems, responsible visitation communications, and things like that. And then finally, our recognition programs, which are offered through Green Destinations. The Top 100 Sustainability Stories is a great jumping off point for any destination. It starts with the 18 best practices. You show compliance with those. Then you move into the sustainability story phase, where you basically write a case study about a great practice or project that you're doing in the destination, and submit that with the idea that, in hopes that it can be replicated. And so this is happening worldwide. There's, a couple of 100 destinations every year that submit to this. So you're also gaining access to all these other best practices that are happening. So it really is this kind of networking and sharing opportunity. You also get international recognition for doing that. And so everybody loves that type of recognition. You can celebrate it with your community, and it certainly helps to gain more buy-in for continuing down that path for higher levels of work. Then we have our third-party certification. This is the much more rigorous side of the program, where you're working on all 52 best practices. You have a rigorous on-site audit conducted. This is for those destinations that are really looking for the highest level of recognition for the hard work that they're doing. And we know that most destinations can't jump into something like third-party certification right off the bat. So we've thought about this in terms of a 3-year roadmap that starts with a self-assessment, identifying your gaps, designing your roadmap, and then thinking about your year 1 priorities. And then you have an opportunity to apply for the top 100. You go into your 2nd year. There's an opportunity to apply for a 2nd year into the top 100. But as you come into the 3rd year, the expectation is that you move into the third-party certification portion and continue the path after that. So there's never a complete destination. It's all part of the journey. And so it's all about continuing to work towards those higher goals.
Well, thank you, Bobby. That was a great, a lot of information. And we really appreciate it. We've gotten some great questions that I would love to have you tackle. When you and I talked about this, we talked about that in many ways, it's hard to find a community that's sort of apples to apples with Asheville trying to do this work. And several of the questions really focus around that theme, that Asheville is really looking for planning that is really reflective of our community and diverse by race, ethnicity, and perspective, even socioeconomically. So I'm curious, Dawn asks if you have examples of places that have destination management plans that are more racially, ethnically diverse, because the places that you provided tend to be predominantly white. If there are stewardship funds, Evan asks, that focus on projects related to racial equity and preserving BIPOC culture and history. So maybe you could tackle those two together.
Absolutely. I'll start with the Stewardship Fund. I think that one's a little easier to tackle. And the beauty of a Stewardship Fund and why I would encourage thinking about one of those locally is there's no set agenda for it. There's no, specific way that those funds should be used. Is what you're doing is you're trying to create, a platform that recognizes what the community values, right? And as you mentioned, many of the examples that I've provided are ones where the public lands are so important to everything around, that the community has to do. And these are smaller rural gateway communities, which is very different from an Asheville context. But in those, it really is about, focusing on the public lands, because that's why people are coming. Those are the assets that are being kind of impacted negatively the most. So I think it is certainly reasonable to utilize stewardship fund like that for a number of social issues. St. Kitts, I would think is a good example of that. They were, kind of one of the first countries in the world to establish a destination stewardship council. They established a stewardship fund similar to that, and they do so much great work. Out of the Ministry of Tourism, they're being responsible for putting those projects in place. And so I would encourage looking into that one as a specific example. In terms of destination management plans, they have definitely started. It's I would say an emerging concept to think about a tourism plan having the ability to put place and community center to the planning process. And it has started. It's easier to think about it in smaller communities, even though one of the colleagues that I work with, has done them in Chicago and in Orlando and others like that, where they're, it's about placemaking, it's community oriented. But I said they're still a little different from what the current terminology where we're talking about it in sustainability and sustainable destinations, those types of management plans that really integrate sustainability, the three legs of sustainability: environment, people, planet, profit, all is key components, as well as place. There's not great examples of larger cities, because I consider Asheville a city, not a town, not a, or anything like that. But I'd certainly look into it. My experience is coming from more gateway communities, but it's something that I would be happy to explore and see what I could find good examples for.
Thanks. One last quick question is, well, maybe not quick, but Jessica Thomason asked how other communities are measuring visitor impact.
Excellent question. There are a number of different ways to do that. Most destinations historically, the value and volume, how many visitors are coming, how much money are they spending. Now we're expanding that to look at how much energy consumption is being used at a destination level. What's the kind of the greenhouse gas emissions? What are wastewater facilities? Or are they tapping out at certain times of the year? Also looking at things around infrastructure. How many miles of sidewalks, kind of accessible sidewalks are there? Bike trails, connectivity from town to recreational resources. Looking at, the number of employees and really starting to dig into workforce and their access to professional development, living wage, a lot of the things that I know this group is already digging into. These are all indicators that are on a long list that have been developed from the UN, WTO, the World Tourism Organization, Sustainable Travel International, and others have tried to put together these massive indicator sets to look at these other ones. The challenge certainly becomes with the ongoing monitoring. It's not easy, so it's difficult to keep it going. We've seen a lot of great enthusiasm in them when we suggest it and launch them, and then unfortunately they tend to teeter off after a couple of years because they're just challenging to keep up with monitoring. So the real kind of answer to that is there's a lot of indicators out there, but you got to find the ones that you can keep up with.
Thanks. I'm going to have the last question is coming from one of our guests today, Pat Kappas from the Explore Asheville. And she asks for, do you have any regional examples where regional partners have come together for this type of work? Many of our area's natural assets are located outside of the county. So if you could quick wrap us up with that one, we'll say thank you.
Absolutely. I would say the Columbia Gorge Tourism Alliance is a great one because it's across a 40-60 mile area or the river, 2 different states, multiple counties, working together around really kind of thinking about regional landscape level impacts and how to, kind of spread the wealth around a little bit, and say, oh, well, Washougal doesn't have a hotel in it. It doesn't really have any kind of dedicated tourism oriented experiences. Maybe that's where we should focus development, and Crown of the Continent, another one, that's 2 Canadian provinces and a US state that are working together, thinking about things at a regional scale. I think it's a really important one because you were absolutely correct that a lot of your assets are happening in other communities and other counties and whatnot. And so that idea of collaboration isn't just within your community, it's also within your region.